Hello and welcome to the Fragrant Divide. In this video, I wanted to share my thoughts on the Scottish Odyssey collection by the perfume brand Jorum Studio. According to the brand, it is an exploration of the folklore and mystery ingrained in their past and present, a contemporary fantasy built around the everyday, extending beyond geography into attitude, humor, and culture, grounded and earthy, joyful and irreverent. All of these are extrait de parfum concentration, and they all come in 30 ml bottles. The price ranges from $95 to $105. I talked to the brand on Instagram, and they said that the perfume concentrations are over 20% but less than 30%. So a little bit of disclaimer before we proceed. We all know that these perfume reviews are very subjective, but after everything that I've tested from Jorum Studio, I am now such a big fan of the brand. So make of that what you will, grain of salt and all of that. With that said, let's start with a fragrance that I will never ever put on my body called Firewater. So this one is a little bit confusing to me. The brand says, let's dance around a smoked out beach bonfire, skin anointed with sticky citrus char. I don't necessarily get that after smelling this. Like this opens with something bright and breezy that is faintly citrusy and faintly smoky. So yes, that does match what the brand is saying, but a few minutes after that, it turns. It suddenly turns into this green, muggy, like fermenting or rotting leaves type of smell. And if you pair that with the smoky facets of the frankincense, it results into this like repulsive tobacco-like smell. And normally I like tobacco, but this one just smells really off. And that's why I will never put this on my body. I was quite baffled by this, so I was curious what the people on Fragrantica are saying. And it's kind of funny because they're saying that it smells like charred meat and barbecue sauce. And I don't really get the barbecue sauce reference, but I do understand where the people are coming from based on that charred, smoky smell. Thankfully, the deep dry down of this is a very pleasant, semi-sweet aquatic. Like it's obviously aquatic. The perfumes that I can think of that remind me of this are Marc Antoine Barbois Ensalade, which is that volcanic green, disgusting Akigala wood thing. And it's not as awful as that, but they both have the same theme of this smoky, charred characteristic paired with like a green, muggy, wet, damp thing. The other one is Violet Ends by Boy Smells. So that one has a very like green, like fermenting tobacco leaf type smell, but that does come with a very fruity, commercial, slightly candied top note. So even though it has that tobacco characteristic, it's still more likable than Firewater. So yeah, composition-wise, Firewater is very interesting. It's as if Euan McCall created a tobacco accord using seaweed, soil, and smoke. But ultimately, it's not something that I would wear. Next up is Rose Highland. This one is a lot easier to comprehend compared to Firewater. It opens a bit bright, a little cold, and right off the bat, it gives you a sort of a green rose type of smell. Also, you'll notice right away that there's that typical rose musk that you get from just regular red roses. After a few minutes, this goes into that familiar territory of pink pepper, Middle Eastern type of rose, and geranium. That combination usually gives off a slightly dry feeling, a little bit of a sort of a paper-like texture, a rough paper-like texture, and overall kind of a slightly old-fashioned feeling to a rose. In Rose Highland, though, the balance of those three notes I think are so well done, and it just comes off so elegant. And even though it's a little bit old-fashioned, it's still a nicely done scent. It's very classy. That rose smell stays the course for a little bit until it eventually fades into something surprisingly like very ethereal, like very light tea that's slightly citrusy. But the notes say it's supposed to be like mineralic and it's using ambergris. So maybe a combination of those just gives off a very light tea-like experience. If I compare this one to something like Paris Monte Carlo's Rose de Taif, That rose goes in the that rose goes in the greener direction because of the geranium, while Rose Highland leans more in the red direction, even though it contains geranium. Some people compare this one to La Fille de Berlin by Serge Lutens, but that one is a lot more voluptuous and honeyed, so the experience is a lot oilier. But Rose Highland stays kind of in the drier side of things. If I compare it to Moschino's Toy Boy, that one stays in the unisex direction, but more dominantly pink pepper than anything else. So compared to Rose Highland would lean more feminine and more red. The next one is Gorseland. Gorse is a yellow flower that apparently blooms in the spring summertime, and it covers like a good portion of the Scottish landscape, and it basically paints the land like yellow. I'm not familiar with the smell of gorse at all, but according to the internet, it's supposed to smell like coconut. This one opens with a lot of bitter greens, like bitter stemmy greens. And right off the bat, there's a little bit of a stickiness that you can feel, almost sap-like, but at the same time, you can feel that there's this floral component accompanying it. Because I looked up what gorse is and that it's a yellow flower, that may be influencing my mind that I'm smelling a yellow flower. But the florals that I'm smelling is really like just very clean flowers, and it's slightly textured and maybe just a tiny hint of citrus. If I have to compare it to another flower, maybe I'll use a very, very, very light version of mimosa without the typical mimosa texture. Or I could even compare it to maybe a lighter magnolia. But it's just a very clean type of smell paired with those bitter greens. Gorseland to my nose is quite linear. The only change that I noticed in the mid is that that sticky feeling that I mentioned in the opening, that gets stronger in the middle, and then for some reason it disappears again, and it almost reverts back to how the opening smelled like. And then after a few hours, like in the deep dry down, what happens is that you kind of do start smelling something like toasted coconut. Then it will change again. Suddenly it will start smelling like ripe fig fruit flesh. And if you combine that with the toasted coconut, it forms this semi-sweet smell that I'm just not a fan of. Even though I'm saying that it's sweet and sticky, this is not the type of sweetness that you get from a lot of like modern things that are coming out right now that are very, very synthetically sweet. This smells natural all the way through. Next up is Pony Boy. The name Pony Boy was inspired by a kelpie, which in Scottish folklore is a mythical shape-shifting horse, and they usually live around bodies of water. And in traditional folklore, they are usually depicted as male. That's why it's called Pony Boy. But there are also other depictions as like temptress. This opens with a slightly cold but very tart rhubarb, and it's very distinctively rhubarb. It's fresh and fruity, and it has this underlying juicy green note that supports that fruitiness. When I first smelled this, it almost immediately reminded me of rhubarb écarlate from Hermes because they both share this watery, tangy, sour rhubarb note. But the similarities pretty much stop there because Pony Boy has this green component that runs parallel to the rhubarb note. Surprisingly, that tart opening lasts for quite some time. And the only change that I noticed right in the mid and early dry down is that you suddenly get this green spicy feeling, like almost very nose tingling spice. But it still goes along well with that fruity tart opening. As the perfume goes on, it does become more and more prominent, and I'm not sure which one of the notes that is, but based on research, my my suspicion is it would be the calamus. So it's almost like a combination of green cardamom and ginger, and also because of the nose tingling aspect, I can't help but compare it to horseradish. As it continues to dry down, the woods mentioned in the notes become a little more apparent, but they come off as very airy and very light. All the while, that green spice is still there, but somehow that base that base still remains sour, It's as if the sourness from the early stages is still connected to the end of the perfume, even though I'm pretty sure that the rhubarb is gone at this point. I think it's brilliant to be able to continue that sour note way in the deep, deep dry down. But the only downside, I guess, is that to some people it might come off as, something something going in the pickle direction. So depending on how you smell it, you might smell pickle because apparently some people just smell pickle all the time. I am actually quite surprised that this one lasts so long on skin. I've had it on my right wrist for several hours now, and it's still, it's not projecting or anything, but it's definitely still stronger than a skin scent. Next is Healing Berry. This one is all about dark berries, but I think black currant is the intended star of the show. This one opens with very tart, juicy dark berries. Most berry perfumes range from sickly sweet, like fruit concentrate, to like very shampooey berry types, which I'm not a fan of. But Healing Berry sits somewhere between those extremes. It just has enough intensity to give you that strong berry smell. After a few minutes, the intensity of the berry does tone down, and then you start feeling something slightly cold, and it starts feeling creamy, like a creamy dessert, but it's very, very silky while maintaining its tartness. So after the perfume starts feeling creamy, it pretty much stays the course of that tart berry with that creamy, silky texture, and that's it. It's actually relatively simple to my nose. I mean, if I stretch my imagination because I saw that there is raspberry leaf in there, I feel like I can kind of smell the raspberry, but pretty much it's relatively linear at this point on towards the dry down. In my experience, it projects for about 2 hours and then starts getting closer to the skin after that. Even though it's no longer projecting, it's still pretty pronounced until about the 4 hour mark where it's now skin scent. On my skin at the 4 hour mark, like it becomes more sour, like more sour than it was, during the mid and the dry down. So it does change on skin, but on my clothes, even though it's still tart, it retains that berry smell. I'm probably not doing Healing Berry some justice because it contains a lot of notes, but I only seem to pick up one single berry accord instead of multiple individual berry notes. If you like Pulp by Byredo, but you want something less of an overripe pink fruit juice and less musk, try Healing Berry. If you are familiar with L'Artisan Parfume's Mûr et Musk Extreme, that one is another well-tempered berry, but it has a lot of musk and sometimes it can get really, really sweet. So if you want something more tart and juicier than that, then try this one. The final one in the Scottish Odyssey collection is called Spiritcask. This one seems to be getting a lot of attention on YouTube. Why, you ask? My guess is that because it's a gourmand. Surprise, surprise. Thankfully, this is Jorum Studio, and Spiritcask is not your same old, typical, predictable liquor-based gourmand perfume that we keep getting these days. This one is about that empty oak barrel that previously contained liquor and now has like just trace amounts of that liquor. And to me, it's pretty successful on giving us that imagery. On the initial spray, even though it immediately smells like that sweet, gourmand, dark amber colored liquor, it is accompanied by something that's kind of sour and a little bit off, and maybe even a little yeasty. And I like that because there's a twist. So it's not just straight up whiskey, cognac, or whatever, but there's that weird twist. And I'm not entirely sure what that is, but it adds a level of uniqueness to the perfume. And yes, it's a little dirty and not the most attractive smell, but yeah, I'm all for it. If you don't like that funky opening, don't worry because it only lasts for like a minute or so. After that opening, it seems like the scent splits in two major accords. One is the gourmand, woody vanilla liquor aspect. The other one is that there's this sweet, woody, very ethereal air around it. And while the gourmand aspect seems to be the one that's heavier and stays closer to the skin, and the air one seems to be the one that diffuses outwards. And it really creates that illusion of an empty, like very light colored oak barrel. Keep in mind that the star of the show here is the oak wood. So for most of the life of the perfume, you really smell that oak wood and it blankets everything else. So I didn't really pay attention to how the gourmand aspect is evolving because I feel like it's hard to catch it. I have to continuously smell to see if something happens. So for a few hours, it's really this kind of beautiful, airy oak wood with just some gourmand aspects. Surprisingly, in the deep dry down, what actually falls off is the oak wood. And typically the woods are at the base, right? And that they're the most long lasting. But in this one, I feel like the oak wood falls off and all of the other boozy characteristics of the liquor disappears. And what you are left with is a really gorgeous vanilla. At first, it really starts to smell like woody vanilla, and then it started almost smelling like how Guerlain would execute some of their vanillas. For example, the vanilla in Angelique Noir and some of the L'Art de Matier collection. Like it almost has an almond aspect added to it, and it's a very elegant vanilla. I was actually quite surprised that that's how, the deep dry down would be. So yeah, I think it's really good, but I think I'm more enamored by the intention of the perfumer and the actual execution. On me, it projects for about 2 hours and then lasts for at least 7 hours on skin and on clothes. It could be longer than that, but that's when I stop paying attention. If you're expecting Spiritcask to be like Angel's Share, I think you'll be disappointed. I can't fully remember Angel's Share, but I just remember it being a full-on amber gourmand. And I don't even think they featured any like significant woody smell. But the latest one that I can compare this to is Drunk Saffron by BTSO. Yeah, it's kind of like very new. But that one features both the booze and the woody aspect. So if you're looking for something that has a little more liquor in it, try Drunk Saffron. So those are my thoughts on Jorum Studio Scottish Odyssey collection. I think that it's a really creative and well executed set of perfumes. They do come off as less complex than what they did for Senyoko, though. I do wish that I could have dissected them better and do them justice. I try to avoid reading material from brands until after I've formed my opinion. But if you want to learn more, check out Jorum Studio's blog posts. They have a series called Anatomy of a Scent, and they really are very insightful. I highly recommend you check them out. I'm currently exploring the rest of the brand's offerings, so I'll probably do a video on those in the future. And spoiler alert, based on first impressions, they're actually pretty good. Because I really enjoyed these, of course I had to get one. So which one do you guys think I got? I hope that was helpful in some way. Thank you for watching and consider subscribing.